In Ireland, almost 1 in 10 people has red hair, the highest concentration anywhere on the planet. And in the same villages, the same families, sometimes the same beds, there are people whose hair is the color of wet coal. Pale skin, eyes the color of the Atlantic on an overcast morning, and hair so black it disappears in low light. For 400 years, Ireland has had a name for them: the Black Irish. And for 400 years, every story Ireland told about who they were has turned out to be wrong. The official explanation, for generations, was that they were the descendants of Spanish sailors, survivors of the Armada, washed up on the western coast in 1588, who married into Irish families and passed their darker features down through the centuries. That assumption was wrong. The story behind the Black Irish does not start with a shipwreck. It starts with a body buried under 200,000 tons of earth and stone on the bank of the River Boyne, dead for 5,000 years. A man whose parents were brother and sister, and whose existence the textbook version of Irish prehistory was not built to explain. We will get to him. But first, you have to walk into the part of the record everyone skips. The romantic version says Spanish ships. It is the one everyone in the west of Ireland heard from a grandmother at some point. It is wrong by an order of magnitude. The Armada sank off the Irish coast in 1588. A few hundred survivors made it to land. Most were killed. The handful absorbed into local families were too few to leave a measurable mark on a national gene pool of 1.5 million people. Modern population genetics, including the most complete genomic survey of Ireland ever assembled, finds no Iberian admixture signal datable to the 16th century. The Armada theory is folklore. Pretty folklore. But folklore. The second story is Vikings. From the 9th century to the 11th, Norse raiders founded Dublin, Limerick, Waterford. They left a measurable genetic mark. About 6% of modern Irish men carry a male line traceable to Scandinavia, and recent work on the rest of the genome shows the Viking imprint is actually deeper than the older surveys suggested. But it is concentrated in the east. In Leinster, around the coastal cities the Vikings actually built. The Black Irish look is famously concentrated in Kerry, Cork, Galway, the west, the part of the island the Vikings barely touched. The third story is Normans. 12th century. Anglo-Norman knights crossing the Irish Sea, founding castles, marrying into noble families. They did leave a genetic footprint. But the genetic footprint is dynastic and Eastern. Aristocratic surnames. Castles. Pale of Dublin. Not the fishing villages of the Atlantic coast. 3 theories. Each one explains a piece of the Irish gene pool. None of them explains the Black Irish. To find the population that does explain them, you have to go back 4,500 years before the Spanish Armada and 700 miles south. In the early 1900s, archaeologists noticed that the megalithic tombs of Western Ireland used construction techniques almost identical to ones found in northern Iberia. Same architecture, same orientation, same ritual layout, different sides of the Atlantic. For a century, the resemblance was treated as cultural diffusion, an idea that traveled, a fashion in stone. Then the genomes came in. The Neolithic population of Ireland, the farmers who built Newgrange and Noath and the Boyne Valley complex, shares more genetic drift with the early Neolithic of Spain than with any other ancient population in Europe. The match is not metaphorical. It is the same core farming population, separated by a coastline and a few centuries of migration. The first Irish farmers came up the Atlantic, by sea, from the Iberian Peninsula, 5,500 years ago, The folklore about Spanish sailors in Ireland is not entirely wrong. It is only wrong by about 3.5 millennia. To understand exactly how a population that arrived by boat from Iberia ended up burying its king under a hill of stone aligned to the winter solstice, and what that has to do with the dark-haired families still living above the fuckers. Same shoreline, you have to look at who got buried in the most elaborate space inside Newgrange. Most people scroll past stories like this without ever looking at the bones. You are still here. That puts you with the readers who want the body, not the brochure. This is the work this channel exists to do. Subscribe. There is another one coming. The body in question has a serial number. He is called Newgrange 10. In 2020, a team led by Lara Cassidy at Trinity College Dublin published the genome of an adult man buried in the most elaborate niche of the Newgrange Passage tomb. The tomb itself is older than the pyramids of Giza. It is aligned, with surgical precision, to admit a beam of light at sunrise on the winter solstice. His DNA overlapped itself by a quarter. Gasp. His parents were full siblings. A union between a brother and a sister or a parent and a child produces a child whose genome carries the same signature against itself. That signature is almost never seen in healthy ancient populations. It is seen, in the historical record, in exactly one context: royal families that consider themselves divine. The pharaohs of Egypt, the Inca of Peru, the royal houses of Hawaii, god kings whose lineage was considered too sacred to dilute with outside blood. That, and only that, is where the genome of Newgrange 10 fits. The man buried under the most elaborate stones in the Boyne Valley was the child of a sibling marriage. The site that raised him as sacred is older than written history. And the network of relatives the same study identified at Carrowmore and Carrowkeel, two more enormous tomb complexes, 150 kilometers to the west, were his distant cousins. Ireland, 5,000 years ago, was already running a dynastic religious elite, with a god king at the center, burying him at the place where the sun returned. This is the part of Irish prehistory the textbook is still catching up to. And then, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, the Atlantic dynasty disappeared. The replacement happened so fast it shows up in the genomes as a step function. Within a few centuries, the farming population that had built Newgrange, the descendants of the Iberian Neolithic, was almost entirely gone. In their place, a population that had walked west out of the Eurasian steppe, picked up new metallurgy on the way through Central Europe, crossed the Channel, and kept moving. They are called the bell beaker culture in the archaeological literature. In the genomic data, they look like something simpler. They look like an invasion. A 2018 survey of 400 ancient genomes across Europe, led by Inigo Olalde at the Max Planck Institute, put a number on what happened in Britain and Ireland. Roughly 90% of the local Neolithic ancestry, the people who had built the tombs, dragged the stones, watched the solstice light, was replaced inside 3 centuries. In 300 years. The line that built Newgrange was not exterminated, not exactly. It was outbred, absorbed at 1/10 of its previous size, then statistically erased. The clearest snapshot of what arrived comes from Rathlin Island, off the northern coast of Ireland. 3 Bronze Age men buried between 2026 and 1534 before the Common Era. Their genomes were sequenced in 2016 by the same team at Trinity. All 3 carried the same father-to-son line, the same paternal signature that, 4,000 years later, is carried by 94% of men in the west of Ireland. They already had the gene for adult lactose tolerance. They already carried the variants for blue eyes. And one of them was already a carrier for the mutation that causes hereditary hemochromatosis, the so-called Celtic curse. The Irish gene pool in almost every defining feature, was already in place by the time these three men were buried. 4,000 years ago. But this is where the story tightens. Because in the west of Ireland, the same west where the Black Irish look concentrates, the Bronze Age signal was preserved more intact than anywhere else in northwestern Europe. In 2017, the Royal College of Surgeons and Trinity College Dublin ran the largest fine-scale genetic survey ever attempted on the island. They called it the Irish DNA Atlas. They sampled hundreds of Irish people whose 4 grandparents had all been born in the same parish. Then they let the algorithm find structure without telling it where to look. It found 23 discrete genetic clusters inside a country the size of the state of Indiana. The deepest of them, the most internally homogeneous, the most ancient, were in the west. Kerry, Cork, Galway, Donegal, the clusters that hugged the Atlantic. They carried less Norse admixture than the rest of the island. Less English, less Norman. They were, in genetic terms, the closest living continuation of the Rathlin Bronze Age, the people the Bell Beaker migration produced, minus most of the dilution that followed. A century of isolation built into the geography. Stone walls, boats instead of roads. Families intermarrying within the same townland for 15 generations because there was nowhere else to marry. The west of Ireland did not stay genetically distinctive because anyone planned it. It stayed distinctive because the rest of the world was hard to reach. When the same study traced individual surnames against the clusters, the patterns were exact. O'Sullivan, O'Donoghue, O'Connor West, McCarthy West, the Deep West. The same paternal lines as the men buried on Rathlin Island 4,000 years earlier. To get a sense of how isolated the West actually became, the modern genomes show that people from the Dingle Peninsula in Kerry are more genetically distinct from people in Belfast than Danes are from Poles. On an island you can drive across in a single day. And one of those western father-to-son lines, in the northwest specifically, descends from a single man. In Domilsize, a team led by Daniel Bradley at Trinity sequenced the male line of a large sample of Irish men and noticed an unusually frequent variant clustering in the northwest. They modeled the spread back to a single ancestor who lived approximately 1600 years ago, which puts him squarely inside the 5th century of the Common Era. The semi-legendary High King of the Uí Níl dynasty, the warlord who, according to the medieval annals, gave his name to a third of Ireland, Niall of the 9 hostages. 20% of modern men in the northwest of Ireland carry his male line. Worldwide, accounting for the Irish diaspora, North America, Australia, Britain, the estimate is between 2-3 millones de hombres vivos descended from this single Iron Age warlord by direct paternal line. Only one human ancestor on record has produced more sons of sons of sons. Genghis Khan. If your surname is O'Neill or O'Donnell or O'Doherty or McLaughlin or any of about 20 variants, and your paternal line came from the north of Ireland, there is a non-trivial probability that the man on the throne of Tara 17 centuries ago is your direct paternal ancestor. Stop and think for a moment about what this actually looks like. You are walking through a village on the Atlantic coast of Kerry. The roof tiles are slate. The walls are stone. A man passes you, carrying a fishing net. His hair is black. His skin is pale. His eyes are the color of the sky, an hour before a storm. The line he inherited from his father traces back 4,000 years to a man buried on Rathlin Island. The line he inherited from his mother traces back further, to a farmer who took a boat up the Atlantic from northern Spain. And his hair has a story of its own. The standard explanation for Irish pigmentation is one gene, MC1R, the gene that decides which pigment your hair makes. About 1 in 10 Irish people carries dos copias de la versión pelirroja de ese gen and is a visible redhead. Closer to 40% de la población carries at least one copy. The frequency is the highest in the world. That part everyone knows. The part that matters for the Black Irish is what that same gene is doing inside the people who do not look red at all. The gene controls the choice between dos pigmentos. El oscuro brown, black. We, el cálido, yellow, orange, red. A working version of the gene tells the hair cell to make the dark pigment. A weakened version lets it slip toward the warm one. Now combine that with the segundo nivel de la historia. The genes for very dark hair did not arrive in Ireland with the Bronze Age migration. They were already there. In 2019, a team at the Natural History Museum in London reconstructed the genome of one of the oldest skeletons in Britain, Cheddar Man, a Western European hunter-gatherer who died on the banks of a river in the southwest of England about 10,000 years ago. His skin was dark. His eyes were blue. His hair was dark and curly. The same pigmentation pattern, the same combination pale-eyed and dark-haired was the baseline of the entire Western European hunter-gatherer population. The population that lived in Ireland and Britain before the first farmers arrived. Before the bell beakers. Before everything. When the Iberian farmers arrived, their genes for slightly lighter skin layered on top. When the Bronze Age newcomers from the steppe arrived, they brought even lighter skin, and the red hair variants layered on top of that. 3 populations. 3 pigment systems. None of them ever fully erased the previous one. Here is what the dark-haired Irish actually are. They are the ones in whose families the dark pigment from the hunter-gatherer baseline survived intact, while the red hair variants from the Bronze Age sat quiet. The same family can produce a sibling with hair like fire and a sibling with hair like wet coal because the genes for both have been sitting next to each other in the same population for 4,000 years. The Black Irish are not a foreign element in the population. They are the part of the original population that the later arrivals never managed to overwrite. And the same Bronze Age genome that gave them their hair gave them something else. The mutation behind what doctors in Ireland call the Celtic curse. Hereditary hemochromatosis. It makes the body absorb and store iron in quantities that, by middle age, can damage the liver, the heart, the joints. Untreated, it kills slowly. Today, it is the most common inherited disease in Northern Europe. The country with the highest frequency of carriers, by a wide margin, is Ireland. About 1 in 10 in the west of the island. The mutation is old. It was already present in the Rathlin Island man 4,000 years ago. And the working theory for why it became so common is not that nature failed to weed it out. The working theory is that it was useful. In a population eating a Neolithic and Bronze Age diet heavy on milk and cereal, low on iron-rich meat, riddled with intestinal parasites, stealing iron from the bloodstream, a body that hoarded iron more efficiently lived longer. A carrier was healthier than a non-carrier. So the gene spread. Then the diet changed. The same advantage became a disease. The same logic governs sickle cell anemia in West Africa. 1 copy of the gene protects against malaria, dos copias paga por ello. Tay-Sachs in Eastern European Jewish populations follows the same pattern. So does cystic fibrosis, and Ireland has the world's highest frequency of the most common form of cystic fibrosis, sitting in the same gene pool. The Irish are not unusually unhealthy. They are unusually old. The genome carries the receipts of every selection pressure their ancestors survived, and the population stayed stable enough through the centuries before the famine, through the centuries after, to keep those receipts inside the same families. In Ireland, almost 1 in 10 people has red hair, the highest concentration anywhere on the planet. The same families also produce the children with hair the color of wet coal. The same gene that makes one sibling burn in the sun makes the other one disappear in low light. The hunter-gatherers who arrived after the ice melted are still there, threaded into the red hair variants that came in with the Bronze Age. The Iberian farmers who built Newgrange are still there, sleeping inside the maternal lines of half the women in Kerry. The God King buried under the Solstice stone is still there, fifth and sixth cousin to almost every Irish person alive. The Black Irish are not the descendants of an armada that sank in 1588. They are the descendants of three populations that never finished overwriting each other, in a corner of the world that was hard to reach for long enough to keep all of them visible at once. The textbook calls Ireland one of the most uniform countries in Europe. The textbook is also right. Inside that sameness, the layers are still legible. You can read them off a face on a fishing boat in Galway Bay. But Ireland was not the only isolated frontier where an ancient genome survived the collapse of the Bronze Age. If you want to keep following this, what ancient DNA is doing to the version of Europe we were taught, subscribe. The people who watch these all the way through are the people who already suspected the textbook had a few flaws below the one they were shown. Turn the bell on if you don't want to wait to find out what the next genome is going to say. Every week, there is another piece of the record that turns out to be more complicated and more interesting than the version we were taught. The next body is already on your screen. Open it.